Hello and welcome everyone to the Trade Desk's first ever Groundswell Digital Marketing Festival. I'm Amber Browne, VP of Client Development at the Trade Desk, and I'm excited to be moderating today's discussion, Growth Pioneers, Success Stories in Modern Marketing. There isn't a marketer in the world who hasn't had to think differently about their strategy in 2020 and beyond. And while the compound challenges we're facing this year are unlike anything any of us have ever experienced, there's so much we can learn from each other, which is why we created this festival and why I'm excited to be here today. I think the playbook that we're writing now will last for years to come. I'm joined today by an incredible group of marketing leaders who will share their own insights and experiences on overcoming the challenges of 2020 and the changes that they're making to build modern marketing organizations for sustained growth. So I'm excited to introduce Molly Brady. She is VP of Customer Acquisition at Disney Streaming Services. In her role, Molly heads up customer acquisition globally and is responsible for signing up new customers to Disney Plus, ESPN Plus, and the Disney Plus bundle, which includes both brands along with Hulu in 22 markets around the world, and that list is growing. Pruitt is VP of Media Strategy and Planning for Inspire Brands Incorporated, the holding company and franchisor of Arby's, Buffalo Wild Wings, Sonic Drive-In, Jimmy John's, and Rusty Taco restaurant brands. In his role, Brian is responsible for leading media strategy and planning activation across all paid media channels. Last but not least, Jeff Rasp is VP of Digital Platforms, Channels, and Capabilities at Bayer. And there are way too many brands in the Bayer portfolio to list, but Jeff has been a key driver of insourcing efforts for consumer healthcare brands with a focus on building best-in-class digital media and measurement strategy. Quick bit of housekeeping. We'll answer audience questions at the end, and we'll also have a few poll questions here as well that we'll post throughout this discussion. So look for those, as we'd love to hear your thoughts as well. So thank you everyone so much for being here. I just want to set the stage a little bit. It'd be great to first talk about the unique set of challenges each of you are experiencing, because they're all very different as we've talked through. And then we'll start to dive in how you've addressed those. So Molly, let's start with you. You started this year having executed an incredibly successful launch of Disney Plus with over 10 million subscribers on day one back in November, which is just unbelievably impressive. And then that also means you only had about 3 months in market before the pandemic hit. And so you had really zero baseline for normalcy. What was the first reaction within your marketing department, and how did you start to think about your acquisition strategy a little bit differently?
Sure. Well, first off, thanks for having me, Amber. Thrilled to be here and participating. I will start by saying I don't think any of us thought we'd be sitting here on September 22nd still working virtually. I mean, I'll speak for myself and my team. We thought it would be a few weeks, maybe a month or two at best, and we'd be back in the office. So what started as kind of a short term, how do we just keep things running, has transitioned into obviously more longer term planning. But as you stated, we were a few weeks post to Disney Plus launch, had just gotten through our first holiday season. We were actually less than 2 weeks out from launching an additional 8 countries in the European markets. And given the initial success, expectations were extremely high. And I think maybe a silver lining is that we didn't have a time to slow down. We just had to keep going. I mean, we were upgrading people's home internet, Wi-Fi access, shipping monitors to houses just to make sure we could get launched in time. And for those of you with, excuse me, hands-on keyboard experience, imagine trafficking thousands of campaigns in 8 markets, 12 languages on your home laptop. So without monitors, everything else, it really was all hands on deck just to get it launched. And, there were some curveballs thrown in, like France. The government of France delayed our launch by 2 weeks because they were worried about overloading the country's internet network during the coronavirus lockdown. So we just had to adapt. And I think that's a theme you'll hear from me, at least today, is just how do you be flexible, nimble, and adapt quickly. I mean, the speed of change, I think, for probably all of our businesses up here has been unlike anything I've ever seen. So really, from a strategic perspective, it was, we kind of had to throw out the playbook. We had launch plans, we were executing against them as these things changed over time and changed really quickly. We just had to be really nimble and flexible and get it done, which thankfully we did.
That's amazing. And of course, with ESPN Plus, you have an entirely different set of challenges with live sports coming to a halt. But it's also almost impossible to talk about that without starting to dive into how you looked to address that. So first, we'll quickly turn it over to Brian. I know lack of live sports also played a massive impact on brands like Buffalo Wild Wings. Can you walk us through some of the hurdles that you were up against here, and then also with some of your other marquee brands like Arby's or Sonic?
Yeah, absolutely. And as Molly said, Amber, thanks for having me. Glad to be a part of this today. Yeah, I mean, I think for sports, in particular for Buffalo Wild Wings, it set up at least two pretty seismic hurdles for us. I mean, we are America's sports bar, so the notion of rallying around the absence of sports clearly was a huge unforeseen challenge for us. And if I think about the shape of our calendar in a normal year, you've got March, April centered around basketball, and then really beginning in August through November, you've got fall football. And so, as we got to the end of March, really the landscape was highly unknown. So for us, that was pretty unprecedented in that sense. So that's kind of point one. Point two, again, kind of proxy of normal year, specific to Buffalo Wild Wings, roughly 70% of our business is based on dine-in occasions. So, for us, it was really a need for some pretty rapid agility planning. And it's fair to say that not all weeks, but many of those weeks, given the fact that such a reliance on in restaurant was a pivot in some cases to 100% off premise. And to do it, especially again, just kind of keeping those two factors together, the absence of live sports meant creating occasions. So, a number, frankly, that we still leverage today that are working well, Wing Tuesdays and Boneless Thursdays as events to really leverage that. Molly, Amber, to your point, I'd be remiss if I didn't acknowledge the other brands too within our portfolio, Arby's, Sonic, Jimmy John's. Sports for us, it's really sort of centered around this equation that reach matters. It's critical to our marketing stack, especially from a video play, and the high impact presence of games really is an integral part of our plan. So in the absence of same thing, it really gave way to this notion of agility planning, converting to a message of almost utility, right? To say in these circumstances, we're going to focus on the fact that our drive-throughs are open, for example. So a lot of change in a rapid pace.
For sure. Jeff, on your side, it's interesting because consumer healthcare as a category has stayed somewhat insulated in that product demand hasn't exactly decreased with the pandemic, but you've still had to make significant shifts in your marketing strategy. What were some of the core challenges that you needed to think about? And then since we're ending here, it'd be great if you could also start to walk us through some of the ways that you started to address them.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you, Amber. And again, thank you for including me as well. Everything has changed. I heard Molly say throughout the playbook, couldn't be more true. We've seen significant shifts in consumer behavior and having to anticipate what that looks like and how you adapt to it in a completely new world without any guide. That's a challenge upon itself. At the same time, our insourcing efforts were really kind of picking up steam. This year is the year that we really were looking to build out our team, and to have to do that in an environment where you can't meet people face to face certainly presented a challenge. We also had really changing dynamics, right? And having to adapt to it. Excuse me. From the beginning when it was all about, stocking the pantry to then, seeing lockdown and having to figure out how to adapt to it. There was no standard and being nimble, being quick to respond, anticipating, keeping your ear to the ground and anticipating what's going to happen next so that you can adapt. These are all the things that we did. Consumer behaviors, we just constantly were monitoring where we were seeing performance, and we were optimizing based on where we were getting traction. During stock, it was maximizing the reach because we knew we had to get our message out there. And then you go into lockdown, and we knew that we had to make a shift to be able to be where our consumers were. So there was this fundamental shift to supporting e-com channels, driving to those channels to drive engagement in an online experience. That was our focus. That really helped to sustain the same level of growth that we were experiencing before. But yeah, you're right. The brands were insulated. Most of them, not all of them, but most of the brands were insulated from this because self-care is something that is actually kind of ratcheting up in these crazy times. recruiting, you have to be nimble, and also you have to be honest and transparent, which we were, and we've met a lot of people, and we've substantially grown the team, and we've done so by finding alternate ways to connect with people, running virtual tests to understand the skill, because you're not seeing somebody face to face. These are all key things that we had to build out and get in place to support this new normal. And then media performance itself, horribly inconsistent, and our measurement models, while solid and have really driven our growth for all the time leading up to April, they still report, but there's inconsistencies. And so having someone or a team actually that is rock solid, who is tapping into industry insights, who's reaching out, making connections, and understanding what's happening in the industry, so that we can bring insight and figure out how to best respond to what we're seeing. Because again, there is no book that kind of outlines how you adapt in a world like this. These are the areas where we were focused to try to maintain and actually grow our business.
Building the plane while you were flying it, basically.
Yeah, pretty much. Sounds right.
Number of ways. Molly, going back to ESPN Plus, I mean, what does a customer acquisition strategy look like when sports have shut down entirely without any indication of when they'll resume? How do you even start to think about that?
Yeah, very, very different. I remember when the NBA suspended its season right before March Madness. That's kind of when it really felt like, oh, wow, like this is happening. It's real. So, while live sports is a critical component for ESPN Plus, we do have a lot of great content on the service that's not based on live sports. We've got the whole ESPN 30 for 30 library. We've got originals, whether it's Peyton's Places, The Boardroom. So there's a lot of other content that we really started leaning into instead of live sports. And I think when you think about how things have changed, you've got this huge audience that's craving sports. There's no sports on. So really leaning into some of this other content helped us pivot there. We also, we were, in terms of just being nimble, like we pulled people off of ESPN Plus to work on Disney Plus. In terms of there was less going on there. We're trying to launch a bunch of markets from home. So we were shifting resources around as needed as well, just across our businesses. And again, just maybe a broken record on being nimble and flexible. I'd say the other, that was kind of at the outset, but when you think about as sports have come back on, it's also been just really different because I don't know how many folks are fans of the UFC on here, but it's exclusive to ESPN. And so, the UFC was the first major sport to come back post-COVID lockdowns, quarantines, and really set the stage for putting the safety protocols in place, proving they could reintroduce in a safe way. But the first event, we were literally up until the day it was happening, not sure it was going to happen or not. So we've got, creative assets in market, waiting to see if it happens. There's government conversations happening, that type of thing. And happy to say, as the different leagues, teams, et cetera, have come back online, while we're seeing more sports, it's still a changed environment in that there's ongoing testing. Another example, we had a UFC, one of the main cards actually came down with COVID the week before the fight. So thankfully he's fine, but the card has to be changed. All the advertising has to be changed, or creative has to be updated, retrafficked, et cetera. So, it's still despite best laid plans, you've got to be ready for changes when they happen, not if they happen.
Completely. I'm personally very excited to see football back, although as a Saints fan, I could have used last night's game to be still in quarantine mode and go away. But on that note, though, I feel like in general, every marketer strives to have creative messaging align with their media. But for you, that connection is inherent to your success and a requirement. So with things like content schedules changing and sports programming in a constant state of flux, how have you been able to manage this? And almost what are the structures that you've had to put in place to help account for that?
Again, really different and just really needing to be fast and flexible. So this goes across both the sports world as well as even on Disney Plus. A lot of production on content has been suspended. It's coming back now, but certain content that we expected to get earlier has been pushed out. Other content, I think we went, at least in the New York City area, we moved to virtual remote the weekend of March 14th. We found out we were getting Frozen 2 on the service, I think 2 days before we got it. So, it was a great piece of content, drove a lot of signups, and is super successful and a great thing to get to market, but not having a lot of time to get it launched. Hamilton's another great example of something that's been super successful, but was actually supposed to come out the following year, and it got pushed up, whereas other key contents gotten pushed back. So it's very similar to sports in that a little bit less, it's not the live sports perspective, so it's a little bit easier, but there's still a lot of I don't want to say uncertainty, but just planning and replanning and pivoting as things change.
Right. I have to ask then, with just the amount and the volume of changes that are needed, how do you balance work and life for your team, and making sure that also, in this environment when things are already a little bit hectic, to say the least, how do you balance the needs of the business with also helping support your team in this kind of environment?
Yeah, my personal both approach and style is to work hard, play hard, and take my breaks when I need them. And I push that for my team as well. And I will say it has been a very, very, very busy year. A lot of people have worked a lot of hours, weekends, nights to drive the success we've been able to drive. But we're also trying to make sure that we are working across the teams to make sure people get breaks. We've been hiring, as Jeff mentioned, a ton as well, which has been a really interesting, I don't have the exact number of how many people we've hired virtually that have started virtually, onboarded virtually. So that's been new as well, as we've been rolling out new markets and just expanding our footprint. So probably not as well as we should have, but it's an ongoing seesaw, I will call it. And I know a lot of folks, myself included, have kids, so balancing work with remote schooling, Zoom meetings, teacher sick, that type of thing is no small feat for any of us.
For sure. We're all in it.
Indeed.
Brian, with each brand in your portfolio has and continues to face a unique set of challenges. It's interesting. We can't really talk about this as if it's over. We're all very much still in it. It feels like for you, there's somewhat of a natural alignment though with the timing of the initial shutdowns and then through the gradual reopening that's still in progress in most parts of the country. Can you talk us through a little bit of a timeline and some of the early steps you've taken through to today?
Sure. Yeah. And Amber, to your point, just to reinforce, we are by no means taking any of this for granted. There's a lot of wood to chop, so to speak, between now and let's call it the quote unquote end, which we just don't know. So there are certain things that we're having to take systematically day by day. But thinking back to the timeline, again, call it late March, early April, a very fortunate something else that we can't take for granted within our portfolio is for the most part, we fell into a category of essential service. Therefore, we were allowed to remain open. There certainly are some nuances. I mentioned in the last Q&A about Buffalo Wild Wings, 70% of our business is dine-in. So the need to convert to off-premise was a business utility and arguably has worked well for us. Whereas Sonic, by comparison, here's a concept that was almost serendipitously built for this with drive-in and stalls, curbside stalls. So there's a high level of an extraordinary level of utility, ops, supply chain, collaboration, a tremendous amount of partnership with our franchisees to look at what our marketing plans were, what we were promoting, certain products which might have been more of a premium nature, non-price point. But as we looked at the economic uncertainty, the staggering unemployment numbers that just seemed to happen overnight, our own analytics of day-to-day performance to understand that we were still seeing a high number of people coming through the restaurants, but the ticket size was up. So to suggest that people were buying more product gave way to value. So I think really leaning into a value equation was absolutely necessary. One thing that I think that we both acted on, but certainly spotlighted as a challenge for us was that, particularly in as we pushed into the April months and April and May, I should say, a disproportionate amount of our investment was locked up into advertising that was pre-committed. That was in large part TV advertising that has, to use the proverbial expression, it's in the can, right? It was pre-produced. And so the messaging that you need to pivot towards, again, case in point, moving from a premium to a value, became a pretty tremendous challenge for us. So, part of the collaboration, I would include some of our media partners to say, we need to look at out clauses. Let's really press on flexibility with the intent to come back, but with the uncertainty as to when that's going to be. In a similar vein, or the flip of the token, I guess, would be changing out that message and leaning into flexibility options, dynamic messaging that in some cases, is putting a spotlight on the fact that our drive-throughs are open, right? To kind of think about it from a little bit almost like a PSA. So a big part of that was ongoing, like I said, daily, but at the same time, reading our own performance results and leaning into what seemed to be sort of a demand from the marketplace. And like I said, just to kind of reemphasize, I think the learnings along the way were pre-commitments and sort of forecasting ahead what the road ahead would be, really gave way to flexibility to become kind of a new mission critical fixture for us moving forward.
For sure. I'd be curious. I mean, I think one of the things that we all kind of draw to when we think about that is just the upfronts. And of course, there was a ton of disruption in that this year. How are you guys thinking about that moving forward?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, Jeff raised some really good points. Obviously, it's looking at consumer consumption, great insights, obviously, which Molly is seeing very often real time, I'm sure. But realizing that, if we think ahead to the upfront, it's a futures market, right? So we're predicting media consumption, we're predicting how it's going to interplay into our mix. So I think for us, as I mentioned, and as we're partnering with our agencies, is to really lean into flexibility, understand how can we be more dynamic to cater to a level of uncertainty, which, I think for us, we have to a degree, believe that that's going to persist in some form. So it's a better understanding of what we're doing to satisfy what we believe is critical for us. I mentioned it earlier, and I'll state it again. I think that reach, in particular for us, especially if we're focused on a limited time offer, be it through casual dining or quick serve restaurants, reach is critical, but realizing that there's a broad spectrum in which to deliver upon that. Including the need for flexibility to change out our message if we need to.
Absolutely. Jeff, I want to turn it back to you and ask a little bit more about where you've had to reprioritize this year, because that has been kind of the top of the list for everyone in terms of let's look at what we'd planned and think a lot differently about what's the most important thing for us to figure out. So beyond that, I guess I would ask just what are some of the structural changes that you think are needed? And it's more of an open question for everyone here.
Yeah. I will tell you, it's unfortunate but refreshing to know that that others are struggling with some of the same things that I'm struggling with trying to figure out new behaviors and how to adapt to them. That is, again, the new normal. Yeah, some of what we're focusing on as we're reprioritizing is certainly putting an emphasis on a new understanding of consumer behaviors and how our media is performing, taking the time to understand those trends. Again, as I mentioned earlier, trying to be very closely connected with industry insight, because again.
Oh. It looks like we have lost Jeff. So we'll transition over to Brian for this next question. Hopefully Jeff can come back and join us here. Brian, I think the next question that I wanted to touch on was just how you and Inspire as a whole think about the relationship between advertising and business growth? And then how has that also evolved in the past few months?
Sure. Yeah. I don't want to begin with sort of this trite notion of measurement, is the end with traditional KPIs. I mean, I think for us, everything that we put forth this year, is really based on this reach-based strategy. But I think relevancy, has been absolutely critical. So if I think about reach and relevancy, how is that impacting consumers? How is it a combination of us generating, let's say, demand for certain behaviors, ideally products, right, that we're putting into the pipeline? But for us to continue to drive growth, I think the relevancy really kind of splits into generally like two different areas. One, how are we appealing to new consumers that maybe haven't tried us in some time or maybe haven't tried us at all? And in these circumstances, right, since call it end of March, early April, have we attracted new consumers and have we been able to retain them? So can we look at the lifetime value of consumers? That's absolutely critical for us. And then critically, here's where I would kind of lean back into the measurement sense to say things that we have done this year, leaning more into maybe less traditional channels for us. Have we been able to demonstrate greater returns in both the near term, but then back to the other value that I mentioned, right, which is the lifetime value of consumers. If we brought them in, how are we able to continue to interface with them hopefully over a long horizon?
Absolutely. It's really interesting because there's a couple of things that I think about with that. One of them just being, I feel like what you're speaking to more than anything is just the need for a really strong data strategy overall to be able to actually look at that information and be able to measure that thing over time. And then just more broadly and in general, it's like, the lessons that we're learning now, I think that one thing that's going to matter more than anything is accountability, and making sure that as we start to build that every dollar is counting as much as possible towards things that are hitting your bottom line. And the good news is that our environment is set up for that more so than it ever has been in the past. And so at the very least, we have that working for us. It's also interesting just because you have this kind of unique moment in time where you get a chance to like come back out of a pause and look and see a comparison in a truer way than you ever really have before in order to get that. Molly, I'll turn to you just to ask, holiday season is upon us, and obviously it is extremely unique. You only have about a half of one under your belt for Disney Plus in particular. How are you preparing, and how is that unique this year?
So very good point. So ESPN Plus has been out for a couple of years, so I think there we have a much better sense, and it really is live sports driven. And this year will be interesting to see what sports are happening during that time period. So it will really be content driven. On the Disney Plus side, we launched November 12th of last year in the US and in the 4 other markets. So there, I wouldn't even begin to think that last year is going to look like this year for so many reasons. It was like we just launched the product. It was new in every way. We had a lot of low hanging fruit in terms of just pent up demand. This year's we're thinking about it. We really don't. As a result, we don't have a set playbook for knowing what it's going to look like. A couple of things we're talking about, though, are, obviously, like when you think about Black Friday, it's a time when a lot of people buy new devices, TVs, et cetera. So we want to make sure that we are going to be where the people are and where the eyeballs are going. So, we've seen more and more of a shift towards mobile. Every year it's the year of mobile, but we've seen more of a shift towards mobile than ever before. CTV is a bigger player than ever before. So, we want to make sure we are going to be where people are consuming the content. Another question we're toying with love thoughts from the other panelists and attendees here as well is just what is the season going to look like from a biddable marketplace perspective? I mean, it's always super competitive, high CPMs, that type of thing. But with e-commerce going more online, is it going to be more competitive than ever? And what does that mean from a repercussion perspective as we plan out our season? And then I think, again, I'm a broken record here, but we're going to have to continue to be flexible. And I pick up what Brian said around, even like from a contract perspective, one of the reasons I like Biddable is you've got a lot more flexibility, but we do a lot of direct buys as well. And when we don't know if an event is going to be canceled or on, we need like more flexibility with out clauses and changes and that type of thing. So I'd say the more we can, like as an industry, get creative to try to meet the changing both marketplace dynamics as well as like I would hesitate to commit to a huge sum of money if I don't know for sure that something's going to happen, for example. So that's just kind of another area we're looking at and where we've been pushing a lot of folks that we work with to provide more flexibility. And then lastly, I think just as we see results come in from a data-driven approach, we're going to continue to invest where we have good ROIs, shift between channels, shift between markets, and it's going to be a great year of learning. I'll put it that way.
Absolutely. And welcome back, Jeff. Glad you made it back on. One thing that Molly had just thrown out, and it was an open question to everyone here, is just your thoughts on the biddable environment moving forward as more e-commerce comes on, and not to mention, we're entering into a political season, and so that's certainly plays a factor as well. And how are you thinking about or bracing for any changes that you'd expect to see there?
Yeah, I just caught the end of Molly and her statement. We're getting much more focused on building out our data strategy. Being able to do precision targeting is really been driving all of our media. So certainly doubling down there and building those capabilities out is our priority. What we do like similarly is the flexibility of biddable media. This is a shift that we've been going through for the last 2 years. And so we've actually, through our insourcing and really seeing performance in digital, we've been anticipating and actually adjusting our investments based on what we're able to see in the way of digital performance. So that has actually positioned us very well because, again, we can be nimble, we can move dollars around. That for us, that flexibility is got us set for hopefully not much more disruption, but to anticipate and adapt as we need to.
Absolutely. Brian, anything that you'd want to add there? We can.
At the risk of being redundant, no. I would say for us, the biddable space, it's probably the most nascent to us as a portfolio, but we're doing it and we're insourcing it. Already, I think it's fair to say that we're seeing the value behind that. So just echoing the sentiment.
Absolutely. Last couple of questions that I have, I'd love to hear from each of you on, and then we do have some questions from the audience as well. First and foremost, is there anything that you've learned so far this year that you feel has made you a better marketer, and kind of part and parcel with that, is there anything that you feel you'll never do again now that you've found different ways to go to market? We'll start with Brian.
Yeah, so, I think the biggest learning, therefore, I think what we kind of look as a carry forward to maybe do differently. I never want to say we'll never do anything again, right, as the landscape has a level of uncertainty. But I, like I have mentioned a couple times, and I'll maybe say it a little bit differently, I think that the flexibility terms on investments that we know are driving value for the business, and therefore we will continue that. It's really unlocking a better way to go about it, and I think the critical thematic really is understanding a level of flexibility that's more conducive to our calendar construct. So that has been both the biggest pain point and the biggest aha for this year, to set us up presumably for at least the next year and beyond.
How about you, Molly?
I'm going to echo what Brian says. I never say never either. Like when you start saying that, that's when you should probably find a new job. You're out of ideas. No. Like I'm a performance marketer at heart, direct response really focused on optimizing, getting efficiency out of every dollar spent. I will say one of my big takeaways from this year, and this is really due to where we are in our life cycle with Disney Plus, but it was brand new to market. And I don't want to say we threw the kitchen sink at it, but we went all out. We are driving growth, and that is my North Star at the moment. And in hindsight, what it's enabled us to do is learn really quickly what works, what doesn't. And so when I think about maybe how I would have approached it in my past life, where it's kind of incremental gains and learning as you go, we've really learned fast because we've gone out really aggressively. So I think in hindsight, I think there's probably times for where you're going to learn fast. Maybe you're not like maybe at the cost of a little bit of efficiency to get a quick learning, which we can now apply to all these other markets we're launching, versus like aiming for that smaller incremental gains as you go, like the inches, if you will.
Right. And it's such an interesting time to come out with that too, because I feel like it's, you're absolutely right in that there is so much room for it. On the flip side of that, there's also like the idea that the kind of balance isn't there, right? Like the baseline that we all kind of know isn't in place to understand that. But again, I guess with the opportunity almost that you made out of the idea of not really having that much of them, you were able to kind of push forward with that, which is really interesting.
Yeah, just the speed that we've learned has been phenomenal. There's a lot more to do, obviously, but it was really something that's been more hindsight.
For sure. How about you, Jeff?
Yeah. I'll give you a never. I'll never be complacent.
Hey.
I'll always be prepared. I'll always be an advocate for bringing forward alternate ways of doing things. For us, we have to be open to that, and we have to also be comfortable with being uncomfortable, right? That's the world that we live in. And we've learned from this that there's the way that we've done business and our measurement model, our reach models, the way that we measure success. But when all of that changes, you need to be prepared to redefine what that looks like. I would say that's what I've learned is never get comfortable with what you know, because it can be gone in an instant. And then if you're not preparing, if you're not thinking through what other proxies might be, you may find yourself in a situation where you struggle to bring forward what you need to measure success, to have the data that you need to optimize. So for me, it's always have your ear to the ground, be ready for whatever it comes, and look for options that may be a good way to measure in a changing environment.
Absolutely. I appreciate the gumption with that one and agree. I think that we've all kind of learned that complacency isn't exactly an option in today's environment. We've got a little bit of time, so I'd love to pull in a question or two from the audience here. First one being, how are you thinking about test and learn during this time? Results during this period may not translate to non-COVID times, so how do you learn to evolve your media with data generated during this time period, not being reflective of kind of normal times?
I'll take it. For us, the iterative way that we run tests basically tells us that we have to learn in smaller, more concise blocks, and that continuously changes. And so I'm comfortable saying that I will measure and do testing in this crazy environment, but recognize that what we learn may only serve us for, look at this pandemic. There have been ebbs and flows within it itself. It has not been consistent. The only thing you can do is measure something within smaller blocks of time, and recognize that you very well may need to kind of crinkle that up and throw it away and start again. So as long as you're open to this evolution of a testing strategy, I think you can navigate and find better, good, better, best. But be ready for change, and always be open to reconfirming that you're still in this period, whatever that period might be.
Yeah.
I'm going to pile on. I could not agree more. I think testing is still critically important. And while the results maybe they're different if you do the same test a year from now, if things are different, but that does not stop you from getting learnings now and driving improved performance now. So for us, we've discussed, is this going to hold? Is it worth testing? We do have that conversation up front, but it does not stop us from testing and testing aggressively.
Yeah, Amber, I would agree with the group here. I mean, I think all great insights. And for us, I think the only filter right now is, is it in some form or fashion steeped to immediate we must do's? And I think for us, the framework in which to kind of calibrate that, is it easy to do? Is it hard to do? Is it high impact, low impact? And how do you triangulate in between? But then again, say, if it's still going to help deliver, and critically, if we're going to learn from it, then let's do it. Let's find a way.
Absolutely. We'll take one more, at least I guess. Brian, this one is directed to you. Have the messaging platforms differed online during COVID, or has it been just primarily the creative approach?
Yeah, just to make sure that I'm tracking on the question, and so let me kind of answer it this way. I mean, there have been creative executions that have been online only, and therefore had bespoke creative. Conversely, there are certain things that we have executed, back to what I was mentioning about the reach equation, to where we're thinking about an omni-channel. So we have essentially it laddering back to the same objective and same iteration of the creative, but tailored to the environment in which it's being served. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, I think so. My assumption, anyways, and this is I'm reading from the audience, and so I can only interpret it as you do. I think that probably going back to the commentary around the creative that was already built out, and in the beginning, having to think about how you can kind of account for that. We heard earlier today in the first session from Lindy Accarino, and she was talking about just in general how it's almost, aside from the fact that you need to be aware of the limitations that exist with what you can actually produce during this time, at this point more than ever, the device or the platform is almost doesn't matter. It's the message that is reaching consumers wherever they are that's most important. So with that, we're just about at time. I just want to say thank you again so much to all three of you for joining. This was an awesome discussion. We talked about writing the playbook. I feel like if there are some themes that we could draw out from it, that I heard loud and clear: agility, the need to be flexible, of course, having a need for a sound first-party data strategy, and accountability have all kind of stuck out to me as some of the core things that I learned today. So again, thank you so much for joining us, and really appreciate the time. Just a quick shout out to everyone who is on. There are 2 more days of amazing content in this festival, including one more session today at 4:30 Eastern, which is the tipping point for TV, where we'll be joined by Variety, NBC Universal, and the stars and executive producers of Psych, Dule Hill and James Rene Rodriguez. So one that's not to be missed. Again, thank you everyone for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.